It started with a message, not a phone call, not a warning, just 7 words glowing against the dark screen of my phone. We changed all the locks. You're out. And then, a laughing emoji. For a moment I thought it was spam, some cruel mistake, but the sender's name glared back at me, Mom. I remember standing there in my tiny Denver apartment, coat half off, snow still melting from my hair. The heater rattled faintly. I stared at that message so long the screen dimmed. Then, instead of crying, I did something that surprised even me. I laughed, quiet, breathy, half mad. Because somehow, I knew this wasn't an ending, that it was the start of something they'd never expect. 2 days later, a different message arrived, from their lawyer. 5 words, we have a problem. Call immediately. That was when I realized the ground had already begun to shift. But before we get there, you need to know what kind of family could throw out their own daughter and still sleep at night. From the outside, the Bennetts looked almost storybook perfect. White painted porch, maple tree trimmed to symmetry, Sunday dinners that smelled of roast chicken and forced smiles. People on Elm Avenue would wave and say, now that's a solid family. They saw Mom's polite laugh, Dad's firm handshake, my sister's pretty curls, and they believed the picture. Inside, though, perfection had rules that bent only one way, toward them. Dad, Richard Bennett, liked to say love meant obedience. That if something broke, I was the first name he called, even before grabbing a wrench. Sarah, hold the ladder. Sarah, fetch the hammer. By 14 I could fix the gutter, patch drywall, replace fuses. Mom, Lydia, smiled through everything. Her smile was her weapon, sweet enough to hide steel beneath. She'd say, family doesn't count debts, sweetheart. And I thought that meant we were generous. It took me years to learn her translation. Everything you give us is owed. Everything we take is love. Then there was Emily, 2 years younger, softer, untouchable. Mom called her our pride, Dad called her the delicate one. And I was the glue, invisible until something cracked. When money got tight, Mom would sigh loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. Electric bill, roof leak, car repair, and somehow my wallet would open. At 17, my paychecks from the hardware store kept the lights on. At 21, my savings patched their mortgage. It didn't feel wrong back then. It felt like love wearing responsibility's mask. They praised me for being good with numbers, so dependable, and I mistook manipulation for gratitude. I told myself, I'm holding us together, but glue never rests, it only hardens and cracks. Thanksgiving, 3 years ago, snow drifted against the window. Mom handed Emily a velvet box, inside, a gold bracelet with her initials engraved. It's for a little artist, Mom said. Emily glowed. I clapped, pretending warmth instead of frost spreading under my ribs. That bracelet cost about 3 months of my rent, but remember, family doesn't count debts. Even now, I can still smell the varnish from the banister I painted at 16, hear the squeak of the lock I fixed, see the porch light flickering, the same one that would later shine over a door I couldn't open. It started as whispers. I came home late from work one rainy night, boots dripping on the tile, and paused by the kitchen door. Through it, I heard my name. Mom's voice. She doesn't realize all her help was voluntary. Dad chuckled. When we sell the house, it'll just be our names on the papers. My breath caught. Sell the house, our house, the one I'd repaired, financed, lived inside with every splinter and bruise to prove it. Emily's voice wavered. But won't she expect something? Mom snorted softly. Expect what? Gifts don't buy ownership. The room spun, the word gifts felt like acid on my tongue. I gripped the wall till my knuckles burned, and walked upstairs without a sound. Be grateful. Be quiet. Be useful, their commandments echoed in my skull. But that night, something inside me cracked. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I opened my laptop, and I began to list dates, receipts, transfers, repairs. Every time they'd said, just this once. Every dollar I'd poured into walls that would soon shut me out. By dawn, a folder sat on my desktop, proof. The next evening came the text, we changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how brave you are now. Haha. The word brave pulsed like static, the laugh cut like glass. And for a strange, electric second, I smiled. Because I finally understood, they hadn't locked me out, that they'd freed me. That night, I brewed coffee, not tears, logged into work like nothing happened, and started tracing back every transaction of my own history. Bank statements, receipts, emails, utility bills, roofing quotes. $85,000 over 14 years. I built what I called the ledger of truth. 2 columns. What I gave, what they promised. Numbers don't lie, people do. Denver in winter is quiet in the mornings, the snow hushes everything. Each dawn, I'd watch it fall outside my window as I built my case line by line, that I wasn't chasing revenge, that I was building justice that whispered instead of screamed. The first attorney dismissed me, called it family drama. The second said, you'll spend more than you'll win. The third leaned forward, eyes sharp as frost. You've got a case, she said, it's not about the deed. It's about equity. If you can prove contribution and intent, you have standing. That word, intent, lit something in me. Because that text, that cruel message, was proof of malicious intent in writing. They'd built the rope, that I just had to pull it tight. For weeks I documented everything, archived voicemails where mom pretended to check in, backed up files twice. Once on a hard drive, once in the cloud. At night the cursor blinked beside the word evidence while the heater hummed. By spring, my attorney said, it's airtight. All we needed was one more trigger, clear proof they planned to sell behind my back. It arrived right on time. An email, urgent property sale notice. They were selling the house, without telling me. I smiled, some gifts deliver themselves. The day of mediation felt like glass, cold, transparent, waiting to shatter. A crisp Denver morning, sky washed pale blue after rain. I walked downtown carrying a folder of receipts and a cup of coffee steady in my hand. The law office smelled of paper and disinfectant. The receptionist smiled mechanically, guiding me to a small conference room, long table. 2 untouched glasses of water, fluorescent lights humming like bees. I sat, placed the folder in front of me, and breathed. When the door opened, I didn't flinch. Mom entered first in her beige coat, soft as always, eyes rehearsed. Dad followed, jaw set. Emily trailed behind, clutching her purse strap like a lifeline. Sarah, Mom said, voice sweet and brittle, you look tired, sweetheart. Good morning, I answered evenly. She smiled again. You didn't have to make this so official. We could have talked. I tilted my head slightly. You changed the locks. Talking didn't seem to be your method. Her smile faltered. The mediator entered, followed by the attorneys. Formalities buzzed around us like static. Then my lawyer opened the folder, sliding pages across the table one after another. Receipts, transfers, invoices. This file, she said, contains proof of Ms. Bennett's direct financial contributions to the property at 1832 Elm Avenue over a 14-year period. Dad scoffed. Ridiculous. Those were gifts. She was helping family. My attorney didn't blink. The payments were labeled as temporary assistance, with expectation of reimbursement. You'll also find texts where both you and Mrs. Bennett referred to those as loans. She turned another page. Additionally, bank statements showing you maintained substantial savings while requesting money from Ms. Bennett under false pretenses. Mom's manicured hands trembled. This is twisted, she murmured. We never. I spoke, calm and low. You told me I didn't have a home anymore. Remember? Silence. Her lips parted, closed again. That was a misunderstanding, she whispered. We were angry. My attorney slid a printed screenshot across the table, dated 11:27 p.m. Exact wording, we changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how brave you are now. Haha. The mediator frowned. That certainly suggests intent. Dad's voice flared. It was a joke. I met his glare, steady. So was your version of family. The air thickened, documents rustled, truth filled the room like slow water. When my attorney finished, the opposing lawyer sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennett," he said quietly, "we have a problem. Call me after this session." The words echoed, the same 5 that had arrived in my inbox months earlier. Mom's facade cracked. "Sarah, please. We're family. Don't do this." "You're right," I said. "That's why I gave you years of chances." Then softer, "Family isn't a free pass to take until someone breaks." Emily whispered, "I didn't know." "Yes, you did," I replied. "You just didn't want to see it." Dad slammed his hand on the table. "After everything we gave you." I cut him off. "After everything I gave you. You didn't raise me, you drained me." For a long second, only the hum of the air conditioner answered. Then my attorney spoke. "Given the evidence, we request a 50% ownership interest in the property, or equivalent compensation." The mediator nodded. "It's reasonable." Dad's face went crimson. Mom stared at the papers like they were burning. Emily looked down, tears balanced on her lashes. When it ended, they rushed out. First that I stayed seated, staring at the folder, the quiet weapon built out of betrayal. My attorney smiled faintly. "You handled that beautifully." "Numbers don't lie," I said. "People do." Outside, sunlight spilled across wet pavement. The city smelled of rain and justice cooling down. In a cafe window, I caught my reflection, steadier than I remembered, not the obedient daughter, the woman who learned to fight without raising her voice. 6 weeks later, the ruling arrived, 50% ownership awarded to Sarah Bennett. It wasn't luck that it was math and memory. Every receipt finally meant something. They sold the house soon after taxes and legal fees. My parents walked away with half of what they thought they'd retire on. They had built their comfort on my obedience, and watched it collapse under my evidence. I didn't move back in. That house was just a mausoleum for illusions. Instead, I bought a small townhouse across town. The first thing I did, change the locks, my locks. New keys, new peace. Sometimes my phone still lights up with their names, emails from Dad, voicemails from Mom, regret dripping through static, but I never answer. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. On quiet mornings, sunlight pools across my kitchen tiles. No orders, no footsteps, just the hum of my own space. They changed the locks to keep me out. I changed mine to keep them from ever walking in again. Freedom didn't come with forgiveness. It came with boundaries, and a brand new set of keys. Because sometimes, justice doesn't roar, sometimes it signs papers, walks away quietly, and never looks back. Denver's winter light falls sideways, soft, pale, like truth sneaking in after years of pretending not to exist. After the mediation, I expected something explosive. Relief. Triumph. Anything loud enough to match the storm that came before it, but what arrived was silence, heavy, whole, unshakable. For the first time in 32 years, no one was asking me for anything. No lists. No sighs about bills. No careful little traps disguised as love. Just quiet. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. The stillness felt wrong, like standing in a room after someone screamed, waiting for the echo that never comes. People used to say I was gifted with numbers, but what I really learned young wasn't math. It was measurement, the measurement of tone. Of pauses. Of how much you could give before someone decided it was never enough. Mom's praise always sounded like a receipt being printed. "Sarah, you're such a lifesaver," she'd say, meaning, "You'll do it again tomorrow." Dad's voice was firmer. "Real strength means taking responsibility." He never said whose. I became fluent in emotional accounting. By 12, I was paying off tool rentals. By 16, filing their taxes because Dad hated paperwork. By 25, I was co-signing loans for a home that wouldn't bear my name. They said I was dependable, but I wasn't dependable. I was trained. And Emily, she floated through life like gravity didn't apply. "Your sisters are little light," Mom would say, fingers weaving ribbons through her hair, and there I'd be, standing behind them, holding the flashlight so she could shine. When I started covering bills, Emily was in art school, painting storms she'd never stood in. She'd call, voice trembling, "Sarah, I'm short again." And I'd send money before she could finish the sentence. She always said, "You fix everything." And every time, I mistook that for love. It took me years to realize, you can't fix what was never meant to include you. The night they changed the locks, I stayed at a cheap motel near the interstate, thin walls, humming heater, lonely TV glowed and I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the blank screen. Who was I without them to need me? For as long as I could remember, I'd been a function, not a daughter, not a person, just a system that turned chaos into calm. Now, the system was unplugged. If they wanted to see how brave I was, they were about to meet the version of me they'd built, the one who didn't panic. The one who calculated. By day, I was still the friendly data analyst, polished, steady, but nights became evidence that I combed through years of transfers, invoices, bank statements, notes scrawled in my father's handwriting. Sarah, pay plumber. Sarah, roof estimate. Every scrap went into a new architecture of proof. Each file was a brick in a home made of numbers and resolve. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger fades. This was precision. My attorney once said, "You're impressive." I said, "I'm practiced." Sometimes I'd look out my apartment window at 3 a.m. snow blanketing parked cars, muting the world that's what justice should look like, I thought, soft, slow, and undeniable by morning. Then came the messages, "Hope you're doing okay. Emily misses you." And later, "We didn't mean for things to go this far." Each one, archived, untouched. Then the voicemail, Mom's voice fragile, almost childlike, "Sweetheart, let's talk. We can fix this." That word again, fix, the word that built my life, the word that broke it. When the judge finally read the ruling, 50% ownership awarded to Sarah Bennett, I didn't cheer, I just exhaled, the kind of breath that's been waiting half a lifetime. Mom didn't look up. Dad's jaw twitched. Emily cried quietly. I simply stood still, because power doesn't always arrive with noise, sometimes it's just the sound of paper turning. The townhouse I bought afterward isn't much, 2 stories, small balcony, red bricks fading in the sun, but it's mine, every inch. When the realtor handed me the keys, my hands trembled, not from fear, from recognition. I installed the locks myself, brushed steel, smooth, deliberate turns. That night, I sat on the bare floor surrounded by boxes. The house smelled of paint and beginnings. That I brewed coffee and listened to the quiet hum of heat through the vents. That was justice too, not applause, not revenge, just stillness that couldn't be taken. People think revenge means ruin, but for me, it meant restoration. That I wasn't tearing them down, that I was building what they couldn't reach, my boundaries, my quiet, myself. I don't think they'll ever understand what they taught me, that love without respect is just an unpaid invoice, and that silence, when chosen, is power. Sometimes, on my walk to work, I pass houses that look like ours once did, perfect porches, trimmed hedges, polite smiles through windows, and I think, how many daughters are still paying the bills for everyone else's peace? Then I keep walking. Because somewhere in this city, there's a woman sipping coffee behind a locked door that only opens for her, and that's enough. It's strange how freedom can sound like loneliness. For weeks after the ruling, the quiet inside my townhouse felt too wide, too clean, like a hotel room that forgot who it belonged to. I would wake before dawn, make coffee, and sit by the window watching the light crawl up the mountains. Some mornings, it was beautiful, other mornings, it felt like silence mocking me. The human heart doesn't switch settings overnight. You can win, and still ache for the voices that hurt you. Sometimes I'd reach for my phone out of habit, scrolling through old messages, half expecting a new apology that never came. There were only advertisements and bank alerts, the cold language of systems that worked the way people should have. I started going on long walks after work, down quiet Denver streets lined with cottonwoods. The world looked smaller now, simpler, couples laughing outside cafes, dogs pulling at leashes, children racing scooters through puddles. Every small noise reminded me that life kept moving while I'd been frozen in survival mode. Now that the war was over, I didn't know what peace wanted from me. One evening, I stopped by a bookstore near Union Station, the kind with creaky floors and a cat sleeping on the counter. That I hadn't stepped into one in years. That I bought a used copy of The Art of Solitude. The cashier smiled like he understood something about me without asking. When I got home, I opened to a random page. The first line said, "Solitude is not the absence of noise, but the presence of self." I closed the book and just sat there, breathing. That sentence stayed with me for weeks. At work, things changed subtly that I used to fill every silence in meetings, fix every broken spreadsheet, volunteer for every impossible deadline. Now, I let the pauses breathe. When people said, "Sarah, can you?" I learned to say, "Not this time." The first time those words left my mouth, I felt my pulse slow, steady, calm. Boundaries, it turned out, had a sound too. They sounded like a heartbeat finally matching its own rhythm. Mom tried reaching out again after the sale went through. A short email, "Hope you're happy with what you've done. We're struggling." No greeting. No signature. Just accusation in polite grammar. I read it once, then archived it. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was earned. Sometimes I wondered about Emily, that if she missed me, or if I'd simply become the villain in her family's new mythology. I thought of her paintings, storms, light breaking through clouds, people half visible in rain. Maybe she understood more than she ever said, but understanding doesn't always lead to change. Some people keep painting storms because calm terrifies them. On a Sunday, months later, I decided to drive past the old house, just once. The new owners had painted the shutters navy blue. The porch light, the one I'd fixed years ago, still glowed faintly against the dusk. For a moment, I imagined Dad inside, fixing a pipe, Mom wiping the counter, Emily humming upstairs. A ghost family living behind glass. Then I blinked, and the image dissolved. The house belonged to strangers now. So did the past. On the way home, it started to snow, big, slow flakes that blurred the world into silence. I pulled over, turned off the engine, and just watched them fall through the headlights. It felt like the universe whispering, "You can stop carrying it now." Back home, I made tea, sat by the window again, and realized something small but profound. Justice had given me peace. But not purpose. Peace is where you rest, purpose is where you grow. I didn't want to live the rest of my life defined by what I'd escaped. I wanted to build something beyond survival. So, little by little, I started rebuilding, quietly, without announcements. I joined a local community class in home renovation, mostly men with tool belts and kind eyes. They laughed when I showed up in paint-stained jeans, but by the third week, I was teaching them how to fix a hinge without stripping the screws. I guess some skills never leave you. Only this time, I wasn't fixing anyone else's house. I was learning to build my own from scratch, inside and out. There were nights when loneliness still came knocking, soft but persistent. I'd light a candle, put on slow music, and let it sit beside me. I stopped fighting it, because loneliness isn't always a wound. Sometimes it's the body's way of telling you that peace has moved in, and it's just rearranging the furniture. Months later, I planted a small garden outside my townhouse. Herbs, daisies, a young maple tree. Every morning, I'd water them before work. One day, a neighbor I barely knew stopped and said, "Your yard always smells like calm." I smiled. That if only she knew how much noise it took to get here. Now, when I lock my front door at night, the sound isn't about fear. It's about certainty. The world outside can shift, twist, betray. But this space, this quiet, this peace, belongs only to me. They changed the locks to keep me out. I changed mine to remember that no one can take back what I've reclaimed. And as snow drifts past my window again, I realize something I wish I'd known years ago. Silence isn't the absence of justice. It's what justice sounds like after it's done its work. Spring came late that year. The Denver air carried the scent of thawed earth and rain still deciding whether to fall. For the first time in years, I wasn't counting days or bills or expectations. I was just existing. At work, people started noticing. They said I looked different, lighter. Someone said at the coffee machine that I smiled, not because they were right, but because they had no idea how heavy I'd been before. The truth is, peace is awkward at first. It's like wearing shoes that don't fit after years of blisters. You keep waiting for pain that never comes. Some mornings, I still woke with my heart racing, ready for the next crisis, and then I'd remember, there was no one left to demand I fix it. The world didn't collapse when I stopped holding it up. That realization changed everything. I started saying yes to things that weren't about survival. An art exhibit downtown. A Saturday farmer's market. A pottery class. A coworker invited me to, the kind of small, ordinary life that once felt impossible. That's where I met Daniel. He was standing 2 wheels away from me at a pottery wheel, sleeves rolled up, hands caked in clay. He looked up and said, "You're supposed to let it wobble before it centers." I laughed quietly. Story of my life. We didn't talk much after that, but the way he said it stayed with me. Let it wobble before it centers. He wasn't like the people I grew up around. He didn't fill silences. He didn't rush to fix them either. We'd walk after class sometimes, slow, no agenda, no performance, and maybe that's why I didn't trust it at first. Kindness without condition felt unfamiliar. The first time he came to my townhouse, I panicked for no reason that he asked to wash his hands in the kitchen, and I caught myself straightening everything. The towels, the mugs, the way the sunlight hit the counter, old habits, whispering, make it perfect before someone decides you're not enough. But he didn't comment that he just washed his hands, thanked me, and looked around like the space was art. You built this? He asked. Yes. I said that. He smiled. You can feel it. We never talked about my family, not for months, but one night, as rain tapped on the window, he noticed the folder on my bookshelf. The one labeled proof that he didn't ask it. He just said, some stories don't need to be retold to be understood. That night, I finally slept without dreams. Time moved differently after that, not fast, not slow, just enough that I learned that healing isn't a sunrise, that it's a dimmer switch, gradual and uncertain. There were days I missed the noise, the drama, even the tension, because chaos is predictable when you've lived in it long enough. Stillness isn't that it demands you face what's left when the fight is over. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'd catch myself rehearsing arguments that no longer mattered, imaginary confrontations with ghosts, but each time, the words lost their fire. Anger without audience dissolves into something softer, understanding, maybe not forgiveness, but something close enough to peace that I stopped caring about the difference. One Sunday morning, I opened my laptop and deleted the folder marked proof, every document, every screenshot, every trace of the war I'd fought, not because I wanted to forget, but because I no longer needed evidence to believe myself. The screen went blank, for the first time. It didn't feel like loss, that it felt like space. That same week, Mom left another voicemail. Her voice was fragile, like someone who finally realized the echo of her own cruelty. I'm sorry, Sarah, she said, I didn't know what we were doing. There was a pause, a breath, then a quieter confession. Your father still won't talk about it. Emily moved to Oregon. We hope you're okay. I listened once, and then deleted it, not out of anger, out of acceptance, because some apologies arrive not to rebuild bridges, but to confirm how far you've already walked past them. That night, I stood on my balcony, the city lights flickering below. The wind was cold but clean. That I thought about the old house again, about the locks, the words, the betrayal, and then I smiled, not bitter, not triumphant, just quietly aware that pain had become part of my architecture, that it didn't define me, that it shaped me, and that's what strength really is. Daniel called later that evening. Coffee tomorrow? I said yes, that it wasn't a big yes, just a calm one, that the kind that comes from knowing you don't need anyone to save you anymore, only someone who walks beside you in silence that finally feels safe. And for the first time in years, I felt something small but alive, not revenge, not relief, just belonging, not to them. To myself. Summer came quietly that year. Denver turned gold in the evenings, the air warm and forgiving, that I'd started to believe the past was finished, filed away like the old receipts I once built my life around. But the past doesn't knock, that it lets itself in through the smallest cracks. The first sign came one Friday afternoon. An unknown number flashed across my phone. That I almost ignored it, but something, the kind of intuition that never really fades, made me answer. Sarah Bennett? A man's voice. Polite, cautious, yes. This is Dr. Miles from Denver General. I'm calling about Lydia Bennett. My mother's name hit me like a dropped plate, sharp, sudden, impossible to ignore. He hesitated, as if waiting for permission to continue. She's stable now, but she was brought in this morning. A mild stroke. She listed you as her emergency contact. For a moment, everything around me went quiet, the cars outside, the hum of the fridge, even my own breath. That it was as if the air itself was asking what kind of daughter I was going to be. I thanked him, hung up, and just sat there, phone heavy in my hand. The last time my mother had used my name, it was to tell me I had no home. Now, she'd written it on a hospital form under, in case of emergency. Maybe guilt has its own way of circling back. I didn't rush. That I made tea, sat by the window, and let the decision settle like dust. Part of me whispered, don't go. Another part, the one that still remembered her hand braiding my hair when I was 7, said, just see. By sunset, I was driving. The hospital was quiet, that kind of sterile silence that always smells faintly of soap and fear. When I walked into her room, she looked smaller somehow, her skin pale against the sheets, her hair thinner, her eyes closed. Machines hummed gently beside her, counting the seconds she might never have earned. For a long time, I just stood there, watching her chest rise and fall, and then she opened her eyes. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice cracked on my name. I didn't answer right away, that I didn't know how. She smiled weakly, as if unsure whether she was allowed to. "I thought you wouldn't come." I could have said many things, that she didn't deserve this visit, that forgiveness wasn't a duty, but instead, I said the only honest thing I could. I wasn't sure either. She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that trembles more than it rings. "You always were stronger than me." Silence filled the room, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It was soft, heavy with everything that would never be said. We talked for a while, about her recovery, about Emily, who had moved to Oregon and was apparently painting again, not about the house, not about the locks, not about the words that had burned our history to ash. When a nurse came in to check her vitals, I stood to leave. Mom reached for my hand, her fingers frail and cold. "Sarah," she said, voice trembling, "you were right to walk away. I just wish you didn't have to." I didn't know whether it was apology or self-pity, maybe both, but for the first time, I didn't need to decide. Her regret wasn't my responsibility, her peace wasn't my job to fix. I squeezed her hand gently. "Rest," I said, and I meant it. Outside, the evening light had softened into amber. I stood in the parking lot for a long time, watching people come and go, children running to parents, laughter cutting through exhaustion. It struck me how, driving home, I rolled the window down. The air was warm, filled with summer dust and something like release. I realized then that forgiveness doesn't always arrive with words. Sometimes, it's simply choosing not to carry the weight back home with you. When I got to my townhouse, the sky was almost dark. I locked the door, poured a glass of water, and sat on the floor. The silence felt different now, not empty, not defiant, just present, alive. In the corner of my living room, the maple tree I'd planted months earlier swayed through the window. It had grown taller than I expected. I watched its leaves move with the wind, each one catching a little light before letting it go. Maybe that's what healing is. Not keeping the light, just learning how to let it pass through you without burning. I thought about calling Daniel, telling him what happened, but I didn't. Some things don't need witnesses, some peace exists only when it stays quiet. That night, I dreamed of a house, not the one they locked me out of, but one that didn't exist yet. White walls, open windows, sunlight pooling on the floor, and my mother's voice, distant but soft, saying, "You're home now." When I woke up, I didn't feel sadness, just a strange, calm truth. She'd changed the locks years ago, but somehow, I'd already found the key. Autumn arrived quietly, the kind of season that sneaks in while you're not watching. The maple tree outside my window had turned copper. Each morning I'd find new leaves scattered across the porch, tiny reminders that even the strongest things learn how to let go. Work was steady. Life was simple, but something in me had shifted. It wasn't anger anymore, just awareness. A sense that what had happened to me wasn't rare, and maybe that was the saddest part. It started one afternoon at a small cafe downtown. I was waiting for a friend when I overheard two women at the next table point. One of them, her hands trembling around her cup, said, "He drained my savings and told me I should be grateful." The other nodded, eyes wet. "Family doesn't count debts," she said, trying to sound strong. That phrase, those words, they cut through the noise of the cafe like a blade through silk. I froze. It was the same sentence my mother had used all my life. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. In their faces, I saw versions of myself, women mistaking endurance for virtue, patience for love. When they left, one of them dropped a folded receipt. I picked it up, intending to call after her, but she was already gone. On the back, she had scribbled something like a reminder, "Stay calm. Don't fight. He'll calm down." I stared at those words for a long time, then I slipped the paper into my pocket. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how many of us walk through life believing silence is the safest choice. We call it peace, but it's really exhaustion wearing a mask. The next morning, I made a decision I didn't fully understand yet. I drafted an email to a local women's legal aid group. I wrote, "My name is Sarah Bennett. Years ago, I lost a home that I helped build, and I fought quietly to get it back. If you ever need someone to help others understand that justice doesn't have to be loud, I'd like to volunteer." I hesitated before sending it. My finger hovered over send like it was a doorway, and then I clicked. The reply came 2 days later. They welcomed me to a weekend workshop for women navigating property disputes and financial manipulation inside families. It wasn't glamorous. Fluorescent lights, coffee in paper cups, weary faces holding stories too heavy for their hands. but the first time I spoke, the room fell silent in a way that didn't hurt. I told them about the night my phone lit up with that message, how I laughed instead of cried, how I learned to translate cruelty into evidence, how numbers became the language of self-respect. And when I said, "Sometimes justice whispers," a woman in the front row began to cry, not the loud, broken kind of crying, the kind that comes from finally feeling seen. After the session, a few of them came up to me. One hugged me so tightly it startled me. She whispered, "You just told my story out loud." And I realized then that what I thought was a wound was becoming a bridge. Volunteering became part of my weekends, listening to stories, helping draft letters, guiding women to legal clinics. Daniel and I had fallen into a rhythm that felt almost like music. That we didn't talk about the past often, but when we did, it wasn't sharp anymore. He'd say, "You've changed," and I'd smile, because he wasn't wrong. The woman who once held her breath through chaos now breathed through peace like it was a language she'd finally learned. One Saturday morning, I was out front clearing the walkway when a letter slipped through the mail slot. No return address. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, that I knew it before I opened it. "Sarah, I hope this reaches you in peace. That I wanted you to know I'm doing better. The doctors say I'll make a full recovery. That I'm sorry for the things I said, for the things I let happen. You deserved more love than I knew how to give. That I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to have this. Mom." There was a second sheet inside, a photocopy of something. My birth certificate. At the bottom, in a shaky hand, she had written, "You'll always have a home, wherever you build it." I sat at the table for a long time, the letter open in front of me. My eyes didn't fill with tears, but my hands trembled slightly, the way they do when something inside you shifts without asking. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't a door you walk through. It's a window that opens slowly, when the air finally feels safe enough to breathe. I didn't call her. I didn't write back. Some connections are better left in the quiet distance between understanding and return, but I placed that letter inside a small wooden box on my shelf, the one where I used to keep proof, different kind of evidence now, not of harm, but of closure. December arrived, the city shimmered under lights and snow, the streets breathing smoke and laughter. Everywhere I looked, families moved in little clusters, children tugging at gloves, couples carrying gifts, and instead of envy, I felt something softer, gratitude, maybe, because I finally understood that family isn't about shared walls or shared names. It's about who stays gentle when the world demands hardness. At the Legal Aid Center, they asked me to mentor new volunteers. One afternoon, a young woman came in, quiet, eyes tired, hands fidgeting around a broken phone. Her story began exactly like mine once did. A family house. A promise. A betrayal, she said. They told me I was being dramatic. I smiled sadly. They said that to me too. She looked up, searching my face. "What did you do?" "I stopped trying to make them understand," I said, "and started proving it to myself." She nodded, as if something clicked in her chest. That moment, the flicker of recognition, felt like a circle closing, not revenge, not victory, just the quiet satisfaction of having survived long enough to guide someone else out. That evening, I walked home as snow began to fall again. The sky was gray, the world muffled. I stopped at a small park near my street, the same one I used to walk through after therapy sessions, when everything still hurt. The benches were dusted white, the air sharp and still. I sat down, letting the cold sting my fingers, and thought about the girl I used to be, the one who believed she had to earn love with obedience. The one who mistook silence for safety, the one who laughed at the text that tried to break her. She was still here, somewhere beneath the quiet, not gone, transformed. I closed my eyes and whispered, "You did it." Not loud, not proud, just enough for the wind to carry it away. When I got home, Daniel was waiting, the fireplace flickering behind him. He handed me a mug of cocoa, smiled, and said, "You've been gone a while." "I had to talk to someone," I said. He tilted his head. "Who?" "Myself," I said softly, and he nodded, understanding without another word. Later that night, when the house fell silent again, I walked to the door, turned the key, and felt that familiar click echo through the air, not as protection anymore, but as ritual. A promise to myself. Because sometimes, justice isn't about taking back what was stolen. It's about reclaiming the part of you that stopped believing you were worth keeping. Outside, snow drifted against the glass, quiet and unhurried. Each flake melted into the window, leaving nothing behind but a trace of where it had been. I stood there, watching, until I could no longer tell the difference between the falling and the staying, between what I'd lost and what I'd learned. And for the first time, I didn't need to. By spring, the snow was gone, the maple tree outside my window had begun to bloom again, small green leaves trembling in the wind that it had survived another winter, just like I had. Life had become quiet in the best way, that I still volunteered on weekends, that I still came home to the same warm silence every night, and every morning, I still made coffee, opened the curtains, and watched the light pour in like something earned. Some days I thought about the past, not with bitterness, but with curiosity, how so much could change, and yet the memories remained like faint pencil marks under new paint. You don't erase them, you just stop tracing over them. Mom wrote once more in early April. A short letter this time. I'm moving to Oregon, she said. Emily wants me closer. I know we'll never be the same, but I hope you're happy. There was no apology, no explanation, just a quiet acknowledgement that we were both learning to live with what we'd built, or what we'd broken. I didn't write back that I didn't need to. The silence between us had become its own kind of peace, not punishment, not distance, just the space required for two people to exist without hurting each other anymore. Daniel and I started talking about buying land outside the city, not a house, not yet, just a place to build something from nothing. That he said, "You like fixing things." I said, "I like starting them now." He laughed, and in that laugh, I heard everything the old house never had: warmth without weight, comfort without condition. One afternoon, I went back to the courthouse, not for a case, but to deliver donation forms for the legal aid group. The building looked smaller than I remembered. That I stood on the same steps where I'd once walked out, clutching my folder of proof. The sky above was pale blue, the kind of color that feels clean. That I realized I didn't carry that folder anymore because I didn't need evidence to exist. That I was living proof. On my way home, I stopped by the hardware store where I used to work as a teenager. That it hadn't changed much. Still smelled of sawdust and metal and effort. The man at the counter looked up. "Can I help you?" I smiled. "I need a new set of locks." He raised an eyebrow. "Old ones broken?" "No," I said softly, "they've just done their job." That night, as I replaced the locks again, I thought about how different it felt now. The first time I'd changed them, it was defense. Now, it was declaration. That a way of saying, this home, this peace, this version of me, she's here to stay. When the last screw turned into place, I sat back on the floor, listening to the faint click of metal meeting wood. That it wasn't dramatic. That it wasn't even symbolic. That it was simply right. The city outside was alive again, children laughing somewhere in the distance, dogs barking, a car door closing, the heartbeat of normal life that once felt so unreachable. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I could almost hear my father's voice from years ago: "If you want something done right, do it yourself." For the first time, I didn't hear control in those words. That I heard truth, not his kind of truth, mine. Because doing it yourself doesn't mean doing it alone. That it means doing it on your terms. I got up, poured another cup of coffee, and stepped onto the balcony. The air smelled of rain and possibility. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled softly like an old story ending. I thought about all the versions of myself that had lived in this skin: the obedient daughter, the fixer, the quiet fighter, the woman with the folder full of proof, and I smiled, because they were all still here, woven into the same steady heartbeat that now whispered instead of raced. They changed the locks to keep me out, but what they really did was teach me how to build doors of my own, doors that open only for peace, doors that don't slam, don't trap, don't break, just open, and close, when I choose. Some nights, when the world outside feels too still, I still think about them, not with hate, not with longing, just with gratitude for the lessons they never meant to give. Freedom didn't roar into my life. That it arrived quietly, in paperwork, in patience, in silence that finally stayed kind. And sometimes, when the moonlight slips across the floor, I can almost hear the echo of that first text again: "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore." And I smile, whispering to no one, "You were right. I don't. That I have something better. Home, not where I was told to stay, but where I finally chose to belong. The kind of home no one can lock again."